This episode contains references to police misconduct, domestic violence, systemic racism, and institutional betrayal. Please listen with care. If you or someone you know has been harmed by police or by systems of violence, and silent support is available. 1-800-RESPECT, 1-800-737-732. That's 200-47 counseling for people impacted by sexual, domestic, or family violence. Lifeline Australia, 13 11 14. For crisis support and suicide prevention. Full Stop Australia, 1-800-385-578. They offer specialist trauma counseling for survivors of violence and institutional abuse. Men's Line 1300-789-978. Support for men experiencing trauma, violence, or relationship breakdown. Warringah Baya Aboriginal Women's Legal Centre, 02-9569-3847, providing legal support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, and 13 Yarn 13-9276, a culturally safe crisis line for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. You are not alone.
This is The Deep Dive, a survivor-led podcast by Underground Media Network. We are your hosts, The Illuminator.
And The Architect. We are investigative journalists working for Underground Media Network, a newsroom committed to exposing abuse, corruption, and the systems that protect it. Karen Webb resigned as NSW Police Commissioner in May 2025.
There was no apology.
No reckoning.
Just silence.
But behind that resignation is a record of institutional failure.
Domestic violence covered up.
Whistleblowers silenced.
Aboriginal lives ignored.
And a police force more interested in image than justice. Today's investigation is based on original reporting by Landon Germanotta-Mills, editor-in-chief of Underground Media Network.
This story follows years of abuse, decades of cultural rot, and a system that rewards silence.
This is The Deep Dive.
And this is what Karen Webb left behind.
Welcome to a critical deep dive into a story that has, well, really shaken trust and certainly ignited debate right across Australia. Today, we're unpacking the tenure and the recent resignation of Karen Webb, the former NSW Police Commissioner. For many of you who have followed the intense scrutiny and, frankly, the numerous allegations that marked her time in office, her departure raises a really profound question. What does it truly signify?
That's absolutely the core of our exploration today. I mean, while Webb's resignation, announced in May 2025, effective September, was framed by some as a quiet, respectful exit after 38 years of service.
Yeah, the long service line.
Exactly. But our source material from Underground Media Network, it paints a very different picture. It reveals it was anything but quiet. It followed a very loud few years of public controversy, and it's widely seen not as a genuine reckoning, but perhaps more of a strategic maneuver.
Right.
So the central questions we'll be grappling with are, what exactly was promised when she took office, what was ultimately delivered, and crucially, what was left behind for the people of NSW?
And this deep dive, it will peel back the layers of a story that really extends far beyond a single individual's leadership, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It touches on these deep-seated systemic issues of police misconduct, institutional racism, and, well, profound betrayal, all as meticulously exposed by Landon Germanotta-Mills and the frankly courageous investigative journalism of the Underground Media Network. We'll be examining whether true accountability can ever really exist at the highest levels of power within such, entrenched institutions.
So maybe to set the stage, let's first establish Karen Webb's background, her journey to the top. She joined the NSW police force way back in 1987.
Right.
Hailing from Borowa, which is a small town in the southwestern slopes of New South Wales. And she steadily climbed the ranks, which is, a testament to her dedication and her persistence within the organization. She got a significant promotion to assistant commissioner in 2017.
Okay.
And then, notably, became the first woman to lead traffic and highway patrol in 2020. That was a highly visible role, quite influential.
Yeah, I remember that.
A significant step, yeah. And that preceded her appointment as deputy commissioner in July 2021. So her career spanned nearly 4 decades, a long-standing figure within the force.
And then, that historic moment, February for Brent 2022, she formally became the first woman to lead the NSW police force in 160 years.
Huge moment.
Huge. And this wasn't just presented as a routine appointment, was it? It was framed as pivotal. And that choice, holding her inauguration ceremony in her old-school Borowa Central School instead of the traditional, very formal government house in Sydney, that felt symbolic.
Definitely. It seemed like a deliberate signal, didn't it? Maybe projecting a connection to community, a more grounded approach, a departure from that sort of perceived elitism sometimes associated with police leadership.
Yeah, a lot of people certainly believed it was ushering in a new era. Reform, approachability, that sort of thing.
And she certainly entered the role with a clear public mandate and a series of strong, quite reassuring promises. In her swearing-in address back in 2022, she declared quite unequivocally, "I have zero tolerance for officer corruption and misconduct, especially involving child abuse, sexual assault, and domestic violence."
That's a powerful statement, very direct.
It was bold, yeah.
Yeah.
Designed to address a public that was, increasingly demanding integrity, trust from its police force. She also pledged to build the organization so it is reflective of the community we serve, adding she looked forward to growing our diversity and our inclusion in the organization.
So really compelling commitments, crafted to inspire confidence, address those long-standing concerns about police conduct, the culture, representation. And to be fair, she did oversee and implement some visible reforms, at least on the surface. What were some of the key actions taken under her leadership that, could be considered positive steps, maybe showing an initial commitment to those promises?
Yeah, the sources do highlight a few tangible points that were implemented. Under her leadership, NSW introduced a domestic violence offender register, which is, a concrete mechanism aimed at tracking perpetrators and, theoretically at least, improving responses to domestic violence. That was a direct answer to calls for better data, better monitoring.
Right.
And an anonymous sexual assault reporting tool was also launched, designed to make it easier, safer for survivors to come forward without that immediate fear of identification or, retribution. That was seen as a positive step, reducing barriers to reporting.
And we shouldn't overlook the significant wage increase police officers received. A substantial boost, wasn't it? Up to 39.4%.
Huge. Made NSW police among the highest paid globally, I think ranked 4th in the world, according to her reports.
Wow. That would undoubtedly have boosted morale internally, wouldn't it? You could see it as a direct investment in the force's personnel, recognizing their work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And she also initiated a cultural review into internal police behavior, a process many hoped would finally address some of those deep-seated issues within the force.
Okay, a cultural review sounds promising.
But, and this is crucial, there's an immediate red flag from the sources. This comprehensive review was never published.
Never published.
Never published, which immediately raises serious questions, doesn't it, about transparency, about follow-through.
Definitely.
So, while these steps were taken, presented as reforms, the question lingers. Did they lead to genuine systemic change? Or did they primarily serve as, public relations exercises, projecting an image of proactive leadership without the full accountability that comes from, public scrutiny of the actual findings?
So despite those initial bold pledges, especially that promise of zero tolerance for misconduct, the sources we're looking at paint a starkly different picture of Webb's actual leadership. Her commitment, particularly concerning child abuse, sexual assault, domestic violence, it appears to have been severely tested, maybe even outright contradicted by the realities on the ground. What do the sources reveal about this significant, quite profound gap between that powerful promise and the lived reality?
Well, the sources assert that under Webb's leadership, the NSW police force was characterized by several critical, frankly alarming failures. These include the shielding of officers charged with domestic violence.
Shielding them.
Yes, suggesting a pervasive pattern of protecting alleged abusers within the ranks rather than holding them accountable. There were also delays and failures in mandatory misconduct reporting, which directly undermines efforts to address internal issues promptly, transparently.
So things weren't being reported properly or quickly enough.
That's the claim. And furthermore, the sources cite failures to sanction officers involved in criminal behavior. The pervasive and deeply troubling conclusion articulated by those who shared their stories with Underground Media Network is that the culture of impunity only grew stronger during her tenure.
Grew stronger.
That's the assertion, which stands in stark, deeply troubling contrast to her stated zero-tolerance policy.
And this wasn't just about, a few isolated incidents or the actions of a few bad apples. The sources describe a systemic protection of abusers and silencing of whistleblowers.
Exactly. Systemic.
It implies a deeply entrenched institutional problem where the system itself allegedly worked to actively cover up wrongdoing and silence those who bravely tried to expose it. Not just a series of unfortunate, disconnected events. It sounds like an internal mechanism designed for self-preservation.
That's precisely the allegation. And the Commissioner's gin scandal, that's another example that publicly challenged her zero-tolerance promise and, raised significant questions about priorities, ethical judgment at the very top.
Ah, yes, the gin scandal. Remind us.
Over $100,000 of taxpayer funds reportedly used on boutique alcohol. Some of it allegedly given to, quote, randoms, even her son's law firm, not just, official international police delegations.
Right. And while Webb was ultimately cleared of direct wrongdoing by some reports,
She was notably cautioned for not disclosing her relationship with the gin supplier. And this incident, regardless of the official clearing, it publicly raised significant questions about judgment, adherence to ethical standards, the appropriate use of public funds, especially when police resources are so vital.
yeah, it really highlighted the perception, didn't it, that maybe accountability was often bypassed for optics or perhaps connections.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's delve into some specific cases now. Cases that truly illuminate these alleged failures and the profound, often devastating impact they had on individuals and, ultimately, public trust. One of the most heartbreaking and perhaps personally resonant is the story of Amy Elizabeth Daphne Jarrett. How does her experience intersect so directly, so tragically, with Karen Webb's career and those very public promises she made?
Amy's story is absolutely critical because it draws a direct line between Commissioner Webb's past actions and her stated commitments while in office. Back in 2004, when Amy was just 12 years old, she bravely reported sexual abuse to Wagga Wagga police.
12 years old. That takes incredible courage.
Incredible. And the officer who took her statement and subsequently closed the case, deeming Amy too young to testify in court, a decision that effectively shut down her path to justice right then, was Detective Karen Webb.
So Webb herself handled the initial report and closed it.
According to the sources, yes. Years later, in 2022, after Karen Webb had become commissioner, Amy tried to reopen her file, hoping perhaps that a new era of leadership, especially one led by a woman promising zero tolerance for sexual assault, might bring justice.
A reasonable hope, you'd think.
You would. But to her utter devastation, she was told her file was permanently closed, and that if she wanted access to her own trauma history, her own records, she would need to subpoena her own childhood records.
Subpoena her own records.
Yes, this bureaucratic barrier, essentially forcing her to re-traumatize herself just to get information about her past. It underscored a profound institutional insensitivity, a system that, according to this account, prioritized procedure over people.
That's just devastating. A truly heartbreaking example of how the system can fail those it's meant to protect. And Amy's direct quote, it really hits home, doesn't it? She said, "She talked about protecting women, but I was the girl they left behind."
It's incredibly powerful.
This case isn't just an unfortunate coincidence. It directly and painfully challenges Webb's stated commitment to protecting women, addressing child abuse. It exposes a deeply personal failure of the system right under her watch.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
It's a powerful indictment of the system's alleged focus on rigid procedure, on self-preservation, over genuine protection and compassion for a vulnerable person. Then you consider the equally tragic case of Clare Nowland.
The 95-year-old woman.
Yes, living with dementia, who was tasered by an officer in her aged care home in May 2023. She died days later in hospital.
Just awful.
And Commissioner Webb's response here drew immense, widespread criticism. She admitted at a 2025 inquiry to defending the officer involved without even reviewing the body-worn footage of the incident herself.
She defended the officer before seeing the footage.
That's what she admitted, which, according to the sources, again points to a worrying prioritization of institutional reputation above human life.
Right.
It created this perception that defending the force's image, defending its officers, was somehow more important than seeking immediate, transparent truth, even in the face of such a tragic, awful outcome.
And then the double murder of Jesse Baird and Luke Davies by serving Constable Beau Lamar Condon in March 2024, that sent shockwaves not just through Australia, but internationally. A horrific crime. And Webb's handling of this incident also came under severe public and media criticism.
Yes, absolutely. The sources highlight Commissioner Webb's notably delayed public response to those horrific murders. That delay contributed significantly to a public perception of a lack of urgency, maybe transparency, from the very highest levels of the force.
Right, the silence was noted.
It was. And even more controversially, she made a public comment expressing gratitude for the alleged murderer, Constable Lamar Condon's cooperation.
Gratitude for cooperation.
That was the word used. Critics described this highly unusual and arguably quite insensitive statement as nothing more than scripted damage control. A profound moral failure, particularly given the gravity of the charges and the fact that a serving officer was the alleged perpetrator of such heinous acts.
Yeah, that comment landed very poorly.
Extremely. These highly public national incidents contributed significantly to the growing list of public controversies and leadership missteps that really defined her tenure. further eroding public trust in the institution she led.
And beyond these headline cases that grabbed national attention, the deep dive into the source material, it reveals a disturbing pattern of other deaths involving police and alleged negligence, incidents that maybe didn't receive the same level of media scrutiny. Can you walk us through some of those other significant incidents mentioned? It shows the breadth, the depth of these alleged failures across various levels of operation, right?
Certainly. And it's important to cover these too. We have the tragic death of 16-year-old Aboriginal boy Jai Wright in February 2022. He died following a collision with an unmarked police car.
16 years old.
Yes. And despite the gravity of the incident, the young life lost. Charges against the sergeant involved were delayed for 2 years. Only late in 2024.
2 years, that's a long time.
A very long time. Then in April 2022, an officer is found guilty of sexually touching a restrained 15-year-old Aboriginal boy, yet no criminal charges were laid.
Found guilty internally, but no criminal charges.
Correct. A deeply alarming outcome that profoundly challenges the idea of justice and accountability within the force, especially when vulnerable youth are involved. In September 2022, Sergeant Justone Wong, driving an unmarked police vehicle, crashed into a bus at high speed, tragically killing 76-year-old bus driver Andy Leonello. Wong was later convicted of dangerous driving, causing death for this incident.
And it wasn't just human lives tragically lost or impacted. The sources detail the deaths of multiple police dogs due to alleged negligence. That speaks to an even broader breakdown of care, oversight, operational integrity within the force. It's a truly shocking detail.
It is. PD Extra and DD Soldier died from heat stroke in October 2023, despite alarms being triggered in the vehicle, allegedly due to handler failure to respond to those critical warnings.
So the alarms went off, but
they weren't responded to in time, is the claim. And then, in March 2025, police dog Eddie was tragically killed in a hit-and-run during an operation. These incidents involving police animals, often seen as integral members of the force, entrusted to their care. They reinforce a disturbing pattern.
They absolutely do. It paints a picture of a force struggling with basic oversight, accountability, extending even to its animal partners who are critical to many operations.
And another significant point illustrating this alleged culture of impunity is the case of Sergeant Justone Wong again, the officer convicted of dangerous driving causing Andy Leonello's death.
Right, the bus driver.
Yes. Despite that conviction, in April 2025, Commissioner Webb permitted him to remain employed by NSW Police after an internal Section 181D review.
He was allowed to stay in the force after being convicted of causing a death through dangerous driving.
That's what the sources state. For those unfamiliar, a Section 181D review is a specific internal NSW police process. It determines an officer's ongoing employment after certain findings or convictions. Critics argue this process often allows officers to remain within the force despite, well, grave misconduct.
Wow.
So this decision to allow a convicted officer who caused a death to remain in the force, it directly challenges that zero-tolerance promise made to the public. It suggests a strong internal bias toward protecting personnel, even in the face of serious criminal misconduct.
The underground media network's reporting, it really gives a crucial platform to the survivors and whistleblowers, those who, according to their account, were ignored, sidelined, erased. These are the voices that directly challenge that official narrative, aren't they?
Absolutely vital voices.
Who are these courageous individuals, and what did they reveal about the alleged culture within NSW Police under Webb's command?
Well, the sources introduce us to Michelle Carlon, a former senior constable and proud Bangarang woman who served for 10 dedicated years. Carlon became a whistleblower, bravely exposing systemic corruption that she says she witnessed firsthand during her service.
And her revelations.
They are truly shocking. She reported that officers allegedly shared crime scene photos of deceased women and children for entertainment.
Shared photos for entertainment.
Using private chats, personal USBs, according to her account. A truly abhorrent abuse of their position. She also stated that sexual harassment was normalized, routinely ignored. And she even witnessed officers deliberately running over stray cats to distress animal rescue volunteers.
Running over cats. Deliberately.
That's her testimony, showcasing a callous disregard for life and a disturbing sense of entitlement. It speaks to a deeply ingrained culture of cruelty and disrespect that, she alleges, permeated elements of the force.
And Carlon's courage in speaking out, as is so often the case with whistleblowers, it came at a very high personal cost, didn't it? They often face severe retaliation for exposing such uncomfortable truths.
Absolutely. She faced financial ruin, professional destruction. A stark and devastating example of the personal toll of challenging a powerful, entrenched institution. She stated explicitly, with profound clarity, "The system didn't fail me by accident. It failed me on purpose."
Fail me on purpose.
Wow. Suggesting deliberate institutional retaliation rather than mere oversight or incompetence. And the officers she reportedly promoted, with one even allegedly boasting about getting away with it.
Promoted after being reported.
That's the claim. This directly and profoundly undermines any claims of a zero-tolerance policy or genuine accountability within the force. Her testimony, which included being told to hurry up the statement from a domestic violence victim because an officer had dinner reservations, it powerfully illustrates the level of care that's a culture, paints a picture of casual indifference to profound suffering.
Then there's Kai, a former officer who used the pseudonym to protect her identity, which highlights the very real and ongoing risks whistleblowers face, even after leaving the force. What was her experience? What did it reveal about the internal dynamics, that alleged culture of silence within NSW police?
Kai served over 11 years. She observed a culture that she says rewarded silence, excused misconduct, and punished those who dared to speak out. She endured psychological pressure and persistent internal hostility, not from the public, but from her own colleagues.
Hostility from colleagues, not the public, that's telling.
It points to an insidious internal environment where ethical conduct was actively suppressed, perhaps, and loyalty to an unspoken code of silence maybe trumped professional integrity. Kai spoke of a complete erosion of respect, particularly concerning the handling of death scenes, vulnerable persons. She also questioned the widespread use of personal mobile phones for unethical purposes at crime scenes.
Using personal phones at crime scenes.
Suggesting they became tools for inappropriate conduct, information sharing, rather than purely operational necessity. She ultimately left the force in 2018 due to the immense trauma she experienced.
Key's powerful quote, "You shouldn't have to destroy yourself to do the right thing," that really encapsulates the profound dilemma faced by whistleblowers in these environments, doesn't it?
It really does.
It points to an institutional culture that perhaps prioritizes self-preservation, protecting the badge and its members over ethical conduct and the well-being of its own people, let alone the public it's meant to serve.
And these deeply personal testimonies from Carlon and Kai, alongside Amy's story, they form the backbone of the underground media network's narrative. They collectively argue that this is not just about misconduct from a few bad apples.
Right, not just individuals.
But rather deliberate inaction, institutional betrayal, and lives broken while leadership climbed the ladder. They explicitly challenge the idea of, well, being just a good copper, asking instead that crucial, piercing question, who got protected and who got left behind? Their stories underscore the profound human cost of what they describe as widespread institutional failures.
These individual harrowing stories, they coalesce into a larger, even more disturbing picture of a pervasive culture of impunity within the NSW police force. How did this alleged culture manifest internally, and what resistance did Commissioner Webb face, or perhaps even, contribute to, in terms of genuine systemic reform during her tenure?
Well, the sources contend that the NSW police force was already rotting from within, even before Karen Webb took office in February 2022. This wasn't a new problem. There was a deeply embedded pre-existing history of, well, normalized violence and hidden truths, according to UMN.
So it predated her.
Yes. For example, between 2018 and 2020, 41 officers were charged with criminal offenses, over 90% male, with many outcomes either concealed or with consequences significantly watered down. In 2018 alone, 6 officers were found guilty of 14 separate domestic violence charges, yet only 3 had convictions formally recorded.
Only 3 convictions recorded out of 14 guilty findings.
That's what the source states. This pre-existing culture where bullies not protected, not punished, it created an environment where misconduct was allowed to flourish, go largely unchallenged, long before Webb's command.
So the problem was clearly not new. But how did it evolve or continue under Webb's command, especially given her promises of zero tolerance and reform? Did her leadership exacerbate it, or was she simply caught in its powerful current? Or maybe both?
Well, despite her strong public promises, her stated intentions, the sources claim that the culture of impunity only grew stronger during her tenure. A significant indicator of this, as we noted earlier, was that cultural review initiated under her leadership.
The one that wasn't published?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Despite its importance for internal reform, it was never published. This persistent lack of transparency, according to critics, directly undermined any genuine commitment to internal reform. It suggests that while the idea of a review was put forward, maybe to manage public perception, the actual willingness to share its uncomfortable findings and act transparently on them was conspicuously absent.
And we also hear from internal police force members, apparently via Reddit comments cited by UMN, about a perceived lack of leadership and an unpopular commissioner. What were some of their specific criticisms? They provide crucial insight into the internal dynamics the pressures Webb might have faced, right?
Yeah, the internal criticisms cited were indeed quite vocal, providing a stark contrast to any official praise. They frequently mentioned the commissioner's gin scandal, that $100,000 of taxpayer funds allegedly misused, as a major point of contention internally.
Right.
Her terrible presence in front of the media was another constant point of criticism,
Yeah.
exemplified by her infamous "haters gonna hate" comment after the Baird and Davies murders,
That comment really struck a nerve.
widely seen as tone-deaf, detached. Her handling of the Clare Nowland incident, admitting she defended the officer without reviewing the footage, that was particularly condemned internally and externally. Concerns about staff retention, unfilled positions were also frequently cited. Some internal voices described her as pretty ineffective and clueless,
Clueless, strong words.
suggesting she was only brought out for basic announcements with no detail when, quote, the shit hit the fan and real leadership was needed. One Reddit user even claimed she oversaw the biggest capability drop in the force's history and provided zero support for frontline officers, painting a picture of profound internal disillusionment.
It certainly sounds like an incredibly difficult, turbulent environment for anyone at the top, even for the commissioner herself. The source material mentions Webb acknowledging that she was constantly dealing with internal detractors leaking against her and constant criticism of her performance in front of the cameras for most of her tenure. Suggests a relentless battleground both externally and internally.
It does. And while she was hailed as the first female commissioner, that symbolic breaking of the glass ceiling, some sources suggest her attempts, whatever they were, to dismantle the entrenched blokey culture within the force were met with significant internal resistance. Deliberate pushback.
So, resistance to change.
Apparently so. She reportedly lost the backing of the labor-aligned police union, a critical internal stakeholder, and faced a massive campaign from the media, according to one perspective. This indicates a deep internal struggle over cultural change, where any efforts to dismantle long-standing norms were met with significant pushback, making real reform a real uphill battle.
So the question becomes quite complex, doesn't it? Was she genuinely trying to reform against overwhelming odds? Was she simply caught in a system too entrenched for her to change? Or perhaps a combination?
Exactly. The sources imply that her departure was, in part, a result of this unrelenting internal friction and external pressure. It's complicated.
Now, a recurring and highly significant criticism woven throughout the sources is that Karen Webb allegedly prioritized optics. You know, the appearance of doing something, managing public perception over genuine accountability, especially when under intense public and media pressure. Can you give us a few more striking examples of this tendency that stand out from the source material? How did this play out?
Yeah, the sources point to several instances where image management seemed to trump substantive action or transparency. Her notorious "haters gonna hate" comment,
Can't forget that one.
uttered after the horrific double murder of Jesse Baird and Luke Davies, widely seen as incredibly insensitive, dismissive, profoundly detached from the gravity of the situation, the immense public grief. Similarly, her delayed public response to that tragedy, coupled with her controversial statement expressing gratitude for Constable Lamar Condon's cooperation.
The alleged murderer's cooperation.
Yes. Both were viewed by critics as transparent attempts at scripted damage control, rather than sincere or empathetic leadership. These actions, coming at moments of profound public shock and grief, they really fueled the perception that her priority was managing the narrative rather than expressing genuine concern or taking decisive, transparent action.
And her admission, the one made at the inquiry, that she defended the officer who tasered Clare Nowland without even reviewing the body-worn footage herself. That's another incredibly stark, direct illustration of this alleged prioritization of optics, isn't it?
Absolutely. That particular admission, made explicitly at a 2025 inquiry, was highlighted as clear, almost undeniable evidence, according to critics, that she placed institutional reputation above human life.
That's a profound accusation.
It is, suggesting that protecting the image, the standing of the police force, even at the cost of acknowledging a tragic incident's full truth, was a guiding principle. These incidents, taken collectively, they fed the narrative that when accountability was needed most, she reached for optics. implying a strategic manipulation of public perception, a focus on superficial damage control rather than a deep, unwavering commitment to internal ethical standards and genuine justice.
Now, the timing of Webb's resignation, it's explicitly described as strategic by the sources, not a natural culmination of her service, not a spontaneous decision. What was the critical context surrounding her departure in May 2025 that makes its timing so significant, so noteworthy?
Well, the sources highlight a crucial, very specific detail that underscores the strategic nature of her departure. Her resignation, announced on May 7, 2025, came just one day after Victoria Police appointed former New Zealand Commissioner Mike Bush as their new Chief Commissioner.
One day after.
Yes, May 6th for Bush, May 7th for Webb's announcement. And Mike Bush is specifically renowned for overseeing major cultural reform within the NSW police force, transforming it after a period of deep public mistrust and scandal. His appointment in Victoria, a neighboring state, it signaled a clear pivot toward transparency and transformation in policing leadership.
So the comparison is quite stark then, difficult to ignore, almost like a deliberate counterpoint. Victoria chooses an external reformer, someone explicitly known for driving deep systemic change, fostering public trust, and then immediately afterward, NSW's commissioner quietly announces her departure. It seems like a perfectly orchestrated, albeit subtle, exit strategy.
Precisely. A legal source and public sector analyst is quoted articulating the sentiment very clearly, stating they knew she couldn't lead through reform, so they timed the optics to look like leadership.
Wow, timed the optics to look like leadership.
It powerfully suggests her resignation wasn't an act of accountability driven by internal reflection or a natural end to her service. Instead, it was framed as an escape hatch, strategically timed for optics, designed to create the appearance of a graceful exit at a moment when truth demanded it, but optics required it, a moment when the public would be looking for systemic change, perhaps prompted by Victoria's move.
Right.
While NSW police media officially portrayed it as a planned transition, the underlying sentiment from the sources is that it was a strategic withdrawal designed primarily to manage public perception, rather than a genuine shift towards accountability or a fundamental cultural change within the force.
This deep dive, it reveals that the alleged institutional failures, that culture of impunity, they extend far beyond just Karen Webb's individual leadership. They point to broader, deeply entrenched power structures. How did political figures and mainstream media allegedly contribute to shielding corruption, preventing accountability within the NSW police force, allowing these patterns of behavior to persist?
Well, the sources explicitly state that despite overwhelming evidence of misconduct, systemic issues, institutional problems, powerful figures in government, and the public sector allegedly circle the wagons.
Circle the wagons. Protecting the institution.
That's the implication. Former NSW Premier Dominic Perrottet, current NSW Premier Chris Minns, and Police Minister Yasmin Catley were all specifically criticized by UMN for allegedly refusing to intervene or staying silent. This pervasive political inaction, according to the sources, implicitly enabled the issues under Webb's command, suggesting a powerful political unwillingness to challenge the police establishment directly, even in the face of compelling evidence, public outcry. Their silence, in effect, was seen by critics as a form of endorsement.
And the media plays a crucial role, too, right? The sources mention a significant criticism directed at mainstream outlets, suggesting they weren't fully holding power to account as maybe they should have been.
Yes. Underground media networks specifically accused mainstream media outlets of having prioritized maintaining police access over public truth.
Access over truth. That's a serious charge.
It is. Implying that a symbiotic relationship between official police channels and the press might have prevented full accountability from being reported or aggressively demanded. The implication is that victims were abandoned, whistleblowers were sacrificed, not just by the police force itself, but also because the broader system, including its external validators in politics and the media, allegedly protected itself by maintaining the status quo, controlling the narrative, rather than demanding full transparency and justice.
So access to official sources became more valuable than maybe aggressively pursuing stories that challenge the institution's narrative.
That's the argument presented by UMN, yes.
This really drives home the underground media network's core mission, their very existence. Because when institutions protect themselves, independent journalism becomes the only witness left. It reinforces why the voices of Landon, Germanotta-Mills, Amy Jarrett, Michelle Carlon, Kai, why they're so vital to this deep dive, providing that powerful counter-narrative to the official one.
It absolutely does. This entire section highlights the alleged cycle of institutional protection.
Yeah.
A pre-existing rot within the force, followed by broken promises from leadership, a pattern of silencing dissent, and ultimately a strategic departure. All of which, the sources argue, were enabled by a broader ecosystem that, intentionally or not, shielded corruption. It underscores the argument that without independent watchdogs willing to challenge powerful narratives, these profound issues would likely remain hidden, perpetuating the cycle of impunity.
Okay, so after announcing her resignation, Karen Webb made a very public pivot, didn't she? Declaring that domestic and family violence would be her final priority as commissioner, and then, very swiftly, accepting a new role as a special advisor on domestic violence to the NSW government, a role she'll begin immediately after her last day as commissioner. How is this perceived by critics, by survivors, given the deeply troubling context we've just discussed?
Well, this pivot, quite frankly, is met with significant skepticism by many of the sources and individuals cited by Underground Media Network. A crisis advocate from Western Sydney articulated this sentiment powerfully, asking, where was this leadership when officers with DV allegations were still wearing the badge?
That's a fair question.
It is. The overwhelming sentiment reported is that the timing of this renewed, very public focus rings hollow. It's seen as overdue rather than being viewed as a consistent, long-standing commitment that defined her tenure. It's widely viewed as a retrospective attempt to shape her legacy in a more positive light, rather than a genuine shift in policy or culture during her time in leadership.
And Amy's case, which we discussed earlier, the story of the girl left behind, it directly contradicts Webb's stated commitment to protecting women, doesn't it? Her personal experience, as Webb publicly talks about protecting women now, makes this pivot seem particularly incongruous, perhaps even cynical to critics.
Precisely. Amy's deeply personal story serves as a stark, living reminder of the alleged gap between the commissioner's rhetoric and the lived experiences of survivors under the system she led. Furthermore, Michelle Carlon's damning revelations about officers mocking domestic violence survivors, joking about suicides during Webb's tenure,
Terrific.
as well as the casual disregard for their stories. It further undermines the idea of a genuine cultural shift or a consistent, deep-seated focus on domestic violence within the police force under Webb's command. And even the internal cultural review into police behavior, which might have addressed some of these systemic issues, was, as we noted, never published, suggesting a lack of follow-through on key promises.
So, while she announced a new mobile domestic violence tool designed to help officers spend more time with victims and claimed to be deeply affected by cases like Danielle Finley-Jones, Molly Ticehurst, Mackenzie Anderson cases she specifically mentioned stuck in her mind due to their violent nature, the overall perception from the sources is overwhelmingly one of optics over accountability, a final public relations play rather than a culmination of consistent, impactful efforts.
Yes, that's the clear conclusion drawn by the sources we've examined. They contend that her tenure was ultimately marked by deliberate inaction, institutional betrayal, and lives broken while leadership climbed the ladder. Her new role as a special advisor on domestic violence, while presented as a continued commitment to public service, is seen by many of these critics and survivors as simply part of managing her public image upon departure.
Just managing the image.
A way to exit with a seemingly noble cause, rather than being a genuine culmination of consistent, systemic efforts to address domestic violence issues within the police force itself throughout her time as commissioner. It's viewed by these sources as a calculated move to reframe her narrative.
So after meticulously examining all these sources, peeling back the layers of public statements, internal criticisms, survivor testimonies, what's the ultimate assessment of Karen Webb's legacy as NSW Police Commissioner, according to the investigative journalism we've explored today?
Well, on one hand, it is undeniable. She served nearly 4 decades in the force, a long and, by many measures, distinguished career. She did crack a significant glass ceiling as the first female commissioner in 160 years.
A historic achievement.
It is, and speaks to her personal perseverance. She also oversaw some tangible reforms, like the DV offender register, the anonymous sexual assault reporting tool, and police officers got that substantial wage increase, up to 39.4%, which, surely would have been well received internally. And certainly, upon her departure, Deputy Commissioner Dean Smith and her successor, Peter Thurtell, praised her, called her a compassionate leader who focused on our people and brought authentic, humble, and elegant leadership. So there's that perspective.
But the prevailing narrative, the one painstakingly constructed from the investigative journalism we've examined, points to a very different, far more critical legacy, one marked by profound alleged failures and deep human costs.
Absolutely. The sources list a devastating record that directly contradicts the positive appraisals and her initial promises of zero tolerance. This includes the death of Aboriginal teenager Jai Wright following a police crash, the tasering death of 95-year-old Clare Nowland, a serving police officer committing a double murder, an Aboriginal civilian dying during a police pursuit with no body cam footage available, raising serious questions about transparency.
A harrowing list.
And furthermore, 3 police dogs, PD Extra, DD Soldier, and Eddie, died due to alleged negligence or during operations under her command. Beyond these highly public incidents, the reporting meticulously highlights the systemic protection of abusive officers and alleged systematic retaliation against survivors and whistleblowers.
The underground media network's ultimate conclusion is scathing, uncompromising. It leaves no room for ambiguity. Karen Webb didn't just fail, she embodied the betrayal she promised to end. That frames her tenure not as a series of missteps, but as a direct, profound contradiction of her core public commitments.
And this perspective strongly argues that her resignation wasn't an act of accountability, it was an escape hatch.
An escape hatch.
Yes, arriving not when truth demanded it, when the full scale of alleged institutional failures became undeniable, but when optics required it. Meaning a strategic withdrawal designed to manage public perception in the face of mounting pressure and that clear external standard being set by Victoria. The consistent message from the independent journalism is that behind every announced reform, every positive public statement, there was a survivor still waiting for justice, a critical file buried, and a profound story silenced, underscoring the deep human cost of the alleged institutional failures during her leadership.
Webb's era as commissioner officially ends in September, but the sources make it explicitly clear that the underlying issues, the deeply entrenched culture we've discussed throughout this deep dive, they will not end with her departure. What is the enduring challenge highlighted by this deep dive going forward for the NSW police force and, critically, for the community it serves?
Well, the sources assert quite powerfully that the culture that enabled it doesn't end. The NSW police, according to Underground Media Network, didn't lose its way, it followed it.
Didn't lose its way, it followed it. That's a chilling statement.
It is, suggesting that the force allegedly chose power over people, silence over justice, and cruelty over humanity. They emphasized that the cracks in the system didn't just wooden, they swallowed lives whole, impacting a range of vulnerable individuals: Aboriginal children, elderly women, whistleblowers, the loyal and the betrayed. This points to a systemic, deeply ingrained problem that transcends individual leadership, requiring a much broader, more fundamental overhaul than just a mere change at the top.
And this undeniable, enduring challenge, it leads us directly to the crucial role of independent journalism, doesn't it? As exemplified by Landon, Germanotta-Mills, and the Underground Media Network. Their work highlights the absolute necessity of external scrutiny when internal mechanisms allegedly fail or are perhaps unwilling to act.
Exactly. Their stated mission is to expose what power hides through truth-telling, lived experience, and unapologetic storytelling. They explicitly declare, when those sworn to protect become the predators, the survivors become the historians. They stress that when politicians and mainstream media allegedly closed ranks or chose access over accountability, Underground Media Network listened. We amplified what they tried to erase because we know the truth. Their survivor-led and fiercely independent approach are absolutely core to their identity, providing that critical counter-narrative.
And they emphasize this survivor-led, fiercely independent approach with unshakable conviction, stating, "We don't censor, we don't negotiate with the truth. If it burns, it burns." They aim to relentlessly break the silence that institutions allegedly count on to shield themselves. And they actively invite others with stories to come forward, asserting that they count on silence, break it.
This entire deep dive, based entirely on the provided sources from UMN, serves as a powerful and frankly sobering reminder of the ongoing struggle for accountability within powerful institutions, and the absolutely vital role that independent investigative journalism plays in uncovering truths that might otherwise remain buried. It underscores that the fight for transparency, for justice, often relies on those willing to challenge the established narrative, even at profound personal cost, and to bring the voices of the unheard, the silenced, into the light.
We've certainly peeled back the layers of a complex, often disturbing story today, examining the promises and the alleged realities of Karen Webb's tenure as NSW Police Commissioner and what it might mean for the broader institution. What stands out to you as the most profound takeaway from this deep dive, and how does that idea of institutional betrayal, which comes up so often in the sources, resonate with your understanding of power and accountability in society?
That's a deep question. I think this exploration of Webb's legacy and the pervasive criticisms against NSW police documented here, it raises a critical question for all of us, one that definitely extends beyond a single commissioner. If, as these sources strongly suggest, the internal culture of an institution can persist, maybe even thrive, despite changes at the very top, what truly meaningful fundamental steps can actually be taken to ensure that the badge genuinely becomes a shield for the vulnerable, and not, as alleged here, a tool to protect itself from the truth? What does it really take to dismantle decades of cultural rot, not just appoint new leaders, but to truly transform the very fabric of an organization like that?
That's a powerful thought to leave you with, one that goes far beyond the headlines and demands a deeper, perhaps more uncomfortable look at the systems we rely on, the systems we trust. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the very real cost of silence.